Greetings! Today, we will recall the events of the first human spaceflight. You will learn under what circumstances Yuri Gagarin uttered the famous phrase, "Let's go." Is it true that during the exit into outer space on board the ship, Vostok burst into flames? And what indispensable attribute of the uniform literally saved the young cosmonaut and did not let him land right in the Volga River? Although many details of Gagarin's flight aboard the spaceship Vostok were classified in the USSR, but soon this information was published in open sources. Be sure to watch the video to the very end to learn all the details of those events. Before the start. So, let's imagine how everything developed at that moment. On April 12, 1961, the Vostok 1 spacecraft was preparing for the planned launch. Yuri Gagarin's preparation was successful, so everyone was waiting for the rocket to launch from the Baikonur Cosmodrome. It is hard to imagine, but already before the launch, Yuri Alexeyevich faced the first emergency situations: overbalance and the risk of a short circuit. The first thing Yuri Gagarin had to face before the flight was the fact that his equipment and outfit was overweight by 14 kilograms. Since there was not much time left before the launch, he had to act critically. Designers and engineers cut some of the cables, as well as eliminated some pressure and temperature sensors. In general, they got rid of unnecessary things. Their decision was explained by the fact that everything necessary is already on board, and what is not useful, removed. Then, one of the testers of space technology and developer of manned vehicles series Vostok and Voskhod, Filin Boris Nikolaevich, discovered and prevented the possibility of a short circuit. Filin recognized the source of such a serious danger when checking the electrical power supply system. In such a situation, there was a simple and expedient solution: to use car batteries in the right quantity. If not detected in time, the launch of the rocket would not just have had to be cancelled. In such a case, the consequences would have been even worse and sadder. The Vostok 1 spacecraft could have exploded. Takeoff. So, the turn came to launch the rocket. But even here, there was another difficulty. As it turned out, the hatch cover did not close. And it is this part of the spacecraft was responsible for the ejection of the cosmonaut in the near future. Plus, the cabin Vostok 1 was not airtight. Soon, one of the designers, Oleg Ivanovsky, was able to open the hatch, after which he established contact and then closed the hatch again. This is how the situation was once again stabilized. Finally, the manned vehicle began to take off. By the way, it was after the hatch cover was closed that Yuri Alexeyevich Gagarin uttered the famous phrase, "Let's go." It is important to note that even in such a situation, the cosmonaut was not confused, and his cheerful voice made everyone realize that the rocket had successfully launched and set off to conquer outer space. A number of difficulties during the flight and entering orbit. As you probably know, even outside the Earth civilization, communication with the cosmonaut was maintained. However, after the launch and takeoff of Vostok 1, the contact with Yuri Gagarin was interrupted. So temporarily, but still, the connection was interrupted. During his first flight, Yuri Alexeyevich kept in touch directly with Korolev Sergei Pavlovich. When the scientist tried to establish contact and hear feedback from Kadar, the cosmonaut's call sign, he heard only wheezing and extraneous sounds in response. But not Yuri Alexeyevich's speech. Fortunately, when the rocket entered orbit, communication was restored. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Gagarin did not lose optimism either, as all the extraordinary situations and force majeure circumstances were solved time after time. After the established communication, Yuri Alexeyevich had to face another test. Vostok entered an uncalculated orbit. This fact was confirmed after the spacecraft began to be at a distance of 85 kilometers above the apogee, so-called the highest point of the orbit. The orbit parameters also changed. 175 by 302 kilometers instead of 182.5 by 217 kilometers. Such a circumstance threatened that the time of Vostok 1 in outer space could be delayed up to 1 month, and water and food supplies are designed for a maximum of 10 days. It is a good thing that at that moment the braking propulsion system worked successfully. Thus, the danger of being left without water and necessary oxygen reserves was over. Forced descent. The next embarrassment followed after the brake engine failed partially, but not completely. The reason was insufficient fuel lost during the flight. The orbital velocity dropped to 132 mph instead of the prescribed 136. Vostok 1 went down, but on a completely different trajectory. Because of this, Yuri Alexeyevich experienced a number of more serious difficulties. The descent vehicle began to involuntarily rotate, and with such speed that Gagarin recalls how he saw then Africa on Earth, then the horizon. I had to close my eyes often because the cosmonaut's eyes were exposed to the sunlight. Soon, the spacecraft stopped, but a surprise was waiting for Yuri Alexeyevich on board. Few people know, but at that moment, the manned spacecraft suffered the fate of fires and overloads. It turns out that the ship's skin caught fire. The reason for such a disaster was the intense friction of the surface of Vostok 1 on the layers of the atmosphere, which increased the temperature outside by thousands of times. At that moment, Yuri Alexeyevich, even from despair, said goodbye and uttered the following quote, "I am burning. Farewell, comrades." But the flames never reached the cosmonaut, but he faced the inevitable overloads. On average, they amounted to 11 G. After that, Gagarin recalled that the readings on the instruments seemed blurry, and his eyes began to grey. This state of health indicates that Yuri Alexeyevich almost fainted. The Earth is close. Here came the final stage after the spaceflight, landing. Only here too, the real hero was waiting for the next emergency situations. Where without them? Please note that the cosmonaut did not fly to the planned landing site, Kovalinsky district of the Saratov region. Instead, Yuri Alexeyevich began to land near the city of Engels, right above the Volga River. This was due to the action of the braking impulse. In addition to the main parachute in the cosmonaut's equipment, there was another, a reserve parachute. Only it did not open at first. But when the wind rose, as Yuri Gagarin recalls, the parachute suddenly came into action. Then the cosmonaut descended not on one, but on two. Also, importantly, there was a break in the stowage at a 30-kilometer altitude. By the way, it was this that saved the life of Gagarin, who was descending towards the Volga. If this had not happened, the cosmonaut would not have freed himself from excess weight and landed right on the Volga. And so the lightened weight helped Yuri Alexeyevich to fly over the waters of the river and land on a solid surface. The last emergency situation that the hero of the Soviet Union had to face was related to the breathing valve. After a successful landing, the cosmonaut must open the breathing valve to already start breathing air on Earth. Gagarin recalled that he had to fiddle with the valve for 6 minutes to finally open it. So all the difficulties were behind him, and the cosmonaut was greeted with celebration throughout the USSR. Thus, the entire flight of Yuri Alexeyevich Gagarin was accompanied by a number of difficulties and emergency situations. All this happened from the very beginning before the launch of Vostok 1 to the final landing on Earth. Such a feat of courage, fortitude, and ingenuity of an ordinary Soviet man has not been forgotten to this day.